Thank you so much, Union, and good morning, everyone. Let me just very quickly share my slides with you. Okay. Um, hmm. As Union mentioned, our focus today is really to talk about psychology and all things psychology and how we, especially at the Department of Psychology at HELP, do what we do to develop the graduates of the future, right? And why we do it and how we do it. Those are the key aspects of what we hope to do today. Now, joining me in this panel discussion is the head of the Department of Psychology, Ms. Elaine Fernandez. Elaine heads the largest Department of Psychology in Malaysia. She's one of our, very proud to say, she was one of our former students from our psychology program and is a social psychology by training, a psychologist by training. And together with us is Associate Professor Dr. Eugene T. He is our resident emotional intelligence expert. So all things emotions, Dr. Eugene is the expert that we refer to when we want to do research or get insights into emotions. Yeah. So let me go straight into this, and I will give them time after that to share their thoughts on psychology today, navigating an uncertain future. So two questions, very quickly, just two questions that we ask ourselves when we developed the program, our psychology program at HELP. The first question is, what is the future of professions, and in particular psychology, in the fourth and fifth industrial revolution? Now, we understand that revolutions, when we talk about a revolution, an industrial revolution, it's got huge impacts over the last 200 years. We've seen this since the invention of the steam engine and how that impacted on the world of work, how it impacted on our lives. Every facet of our lives is impacted when we talk about an industrial revolution. So in the last 20 years, we've been talking about this thing called the fourth industrial revolution. And even as we are getting used to the fourth industrial revolution, we already, people are already talking about the fifth industrial revolution in such a short period of time. Yeah, and the fifth industrial revolution, of course, is this interface between machine and human beings. So when you think about this, and you think about the pace of change, and you think about the speed in which things are constantly transforming and evolving. In the last 3 months itself, we realize, the way we do things in just 3 months. When you go back to work, when people have gone back to work since Wednesday, the workplace is not the same anymore. In just 3 months, that's how fast things change, and human beings have to learn to adapt, right? So the question for us as psychologists and people who develop, train, and psychologists, future psychologists, that's the first question that we ask ourselves. What is the future of the professions, specifically psychologists, the field of psychology itself in this 21st century that we are living in? Yeah, so we talk about machine learning, we talk about AI, we talk about robotics, nanotechnology, and so forth. Yeah, so huge changes. So what is the future of the field of psychology in this? One of the interesting stats that came up from the World Economic Forum, I think this was about 2 years ago. Interesting that they talk about 65% of school students will be employed in jobs that do not exist today. Yeah, 200 years ago, you went to school to prepare you for jobs that were very much after 12, 13, 15 years after your university. You would have jobs waiting for you that fit very nicely with what you had done in school. Students today, if you are in Form 4, Form 5, by the time you finish university, your A levels, university, that's a good 7, 8 years. By the time you come out, what will be the jobs that will have just started to develop, right? So when you think about it, when you come out from your education, from your schooling, will you be prepared for this new world that will be in front of you? A world that nobody 5, 8 years ago even realized or recognized would even exist. Yeah. The second question that we ask ourselves when we developed our psychology program is, does the psychology program specifically at Help University, at the Department of Psychology at Help, at this biggest Department of Psychology where we've graduated thousands of students over the last 20 years, prepare or future-proof, that's the term that we use today. Will you be a future-proof graduate in psychology, right? When you think about this future. So what you see here is just a sampling of the many fields of areas of psychology. This is the body of knowledge. But is this body of knowledge all that we teach? Is it all that we talk about when students go through 3 years with us? And the answer obviously is no. This is necessary as part of your learning and your development, but is there more? And the answer obviously to that is yes. So when we think about what we hope to be the kind of graduates that come out from our programs, what guides us is the understanding that because of the technological changes, and the fact that there will be a lot of technology in the community that will very much replace many of the things that human beings do. So there are studies out there that says in 10, 15, 20 years, you don't need an accountant anymore. You may not even need a doctor, because there are machines that will be out there that will be able to do the work of human beings, right? So that's why they talk about the decline in the demand for traditional professions, even white-collar professions, not just blue-collar professions. So the question is, how much of learning therefore needs to involve just knowledge and the or processes that can be easily done by machines, by AI? So should learning therefore, on the other hand, focus on developing the qualities of what makes us uniquely human, right? That is the question that we need to ask ourselves. And when you think about psychology, our motto at the Department of Psychology at Health is understanding minds. So the body of knowledge that we need to have to understand minds, but more importantly, empowering lives. Who are the experts of human beings? Who are these people that we are developing that machines will never be able to replace, right? And what makes us uniquely human? And therefore, for us as a university, as a Department of Psychology, when we talk about learning for this uncertain future, it has to be more about just learning knowledge and skills, but it has to be the development of qualities and human dispositions to enhance what it means to really be human. That is what they call it in the field of education, something what we call ontology, the ontological learning that happens, right? And so I'm not going to speak very much about this because I'm going to pass this on to Ms. Elaine to talk about this. For us, when graduates come through us, when they go through this process of learning at the Department of Psychology at HELP, what they will come out with is a different kind of human being that will come out and graduate from us, a different kind of human being, not just with a very strong foundations in the body of knowledge in the field of psychology, but certainly a kind of human being that will be an effective communicator, that is emotionally intelligent, something what we call who's also contextually intelligent, and Elaine will of course talk more about this, that is creative, innovative, that is a problem solver, that is critical and analytical in his or her ability to think through problems that may not even exist today, but when it happens in the future, they will have the ability, because that is what will enhance their evolution as sentient beings, in this world that we live in as we proceed into the future. So let me just leave you with some of those initial thoughts and pass you on then to Ms. Elaine Fernandez, who will guide you through what is it that we have done in terms of our curriculum to prepare our students for this uncertain future. Elaine, over to you.
All right, thank you, Jerry. Hi, everyone. My name is Elaine. I am the head of Department of Psychology at HELP. What I'm going to do now is basically talk you through how we've designed our psychology program to meet these demands, as Jerry has highlighted before. So if you just give me a second, I will share my slides with you. All right, so I'm going to just start off by talking you through our process of trying to design something that would make our students, as Jerry mentioned before, future ready, right? So when we're looking at the curriculum and looking at what we need to put in place in order to ensure that our psychology graduates are not just competent in the knowledge base that is of psychology, as Jerry mentioned before, there was so many different areas in psychology that you're exposed to, but also have what we call the transferable skills to enable you to adapt to the demands or the changing demands of 21st century life. All right, so in looking at what might be important for people, we've looked at what the international psychology community is doing in terms of where their focuses are. We've looked at the demands of industry, what employers are saying are going to be important skill sets for graduates to have. We've looked at the postgraduate needs of our students, those of you who intend to go into clinical psychology, counseling, neuropsychology, what requirements would that have of our students? We've looked at what the Malaysian Qualifications Agency talks about in terms of the quality frameworks that they have in place for Malaysian graduates. We've spoken to members of the Malaysian Psychological Society. So we've basically triangulated what people are predicting will be important for a psychology graduate or just in general an effective person who is going to come into the workforce that is going to be increasingly uncertain as technology evolves, as expectations change within the market, and so on. So we've compiled all of these predictions and also these observations made by people across various industries and internationally. And we narrowed that down to a number of skill sets that we believe are universal and that are important for our graduates to have in order to make themselves as relevant as they can, regardless of what happens in the environment. So the skills that we've focused on and we believe are extremely important are hard skills and soft skills, a good mix of that because you need all of these in order to be holistic. So we train all our students in these various areas through different means across different subjects. But essentially, what we want to focus on and what we want our graduates to have once they leave us is they need to have strong research skills and the ability to analyze and understand and make predictions from data. They need to have the ability to think creatively, critically, innovatively, and they need to be able to use that thinking to come up with solutions for the unique problems that will arise across the course of time in their careers. In addition, they need to also be able to communicate those ideas clearly in order to be influential in a positive way. Whether it's written or verbal, that communication needs to be clear. And it needs to take into consideration the expectations of the person listening and receiving that communication. And in order to do this well, they also need to have the softer skills, which we've basically called contextual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and also focus on personal growth and development. Now, this side on the right side of the screen, why this is important is because it forms the foundation of not just the quality of the eventual decisions that are made, but also how ethical, how positive these decisions, what kind of impact these decisions will have on the people that they are trying to help or serve. So contextual intelligence, I will go into in a little bit more detail in a second, but essentially it's the ability to properly assess a situation, understand the resources, that are available within that situation and use those wisely in order to generate appropriate solutions for the different contexts that they find themselves in. Okay. Then there's emotional intelligence, which is the ability to understand your own and others' emotions in order to best manage your own and also others' emotions in order to effect positive outcomes. And finally, we focus very much on personal growth and development because, as Dr. Jerry mentioned, psychologists deal with human beings. And when you understand how to influence human behavior, you can do that for better or for worse. And in order for psychologists to focus on making positive changes and effecting change that will be helpful rather than hindrance to society, and also in the larger interests of the people that they work for rather than in self-interest, they also need to develop other parts of themselves that are equally as important as the skill sets, such as ethics, such as self-awareness, and so on. So part of our program, a huge part of our program actually, is laying these foundations to ensure that the people that we graduate are also going to be ethical actors when they enter into the industry later on. Now, one other area in which we've recognized that our program is geared towards is in looking at the skills that are in demand or that are predicted to be in demand in the 21st century. And if you look at the top two, it says complex problem solving and social skills, which we've sort of recognized as being contextual intelligence as well as emotional intelligence. I'm going to talk about these shortly. So with regard to contextual intelligence, what we've come up with is basically this as a foundational roadmap for enabling our students to be able to be effective regardless of where they go, regardless of what happens in the industries they choose to go into. And it's a very systematic approach that can be applied across different situations, different scenarios, different problems that they encounter. So our contextual intelligence roadmap basically asks our students to first know what their goal is in any situation. What is it that they want to achieve? And then once they know that, they need to develop critical questions to understand that context and what questions they need to ask in order to help them achieve that goal. Questions such as who has the power or the influence in this context? What resources are available in this context? What barriers are in place here that are going to prevent me from reaching my goals? And what can I do to minimize the impact of these barriers and also maximize the influence of the people in that environment who can actually help me get to where I want to go? So by knowing how to ask the right questions and to mobilize the right resources, they can then develop effective strategies to help them reach the goals that they have set within whatever environment they are in. Now, a very important function as well that a lot of the times we overlook once we have implemented a strategy is not just the execution of the plan that they come up with, but also the evaluation and the learning from that plan. So the idea is if a student can be trained to think systematically and to apply these thought processes across different environments that they encounter, they're not necessarily going to need any specific knowledge sets in order to make them effective across different environments, because they will know how to gain that knowledge in sort of the understanding stage. They will know the right questions to ask to identify the correct information that they need to make them effective. So in training our students in this way, we enable them to become effective regardless of whether or not the industry they go into is one they have had prior exposure to. In fact, if the industry changes, they're going to be able to pivot easily because they have the ability to think through the new information, the new context that they are now presented with. But in addition to that, and if you remember, the second most important soft skill that have been identified is social skills. And we broke this down into several important components that we believe psychology graduates in particular should have because we deal with human beings. So the first one is self-awareness, how we impact ourselves, our environment, and other people in our environment. Because a lot of the time we find that conflict arises because people always look externally for the source of the conflict. We don't necessarily always know when we are the ones or how we are contributing to a particular situation. So it is important for people to develop self-awareness because one, it allows you to understand yourself, your needs, your goals, your desires, etc., much better, which then allows for you to reach your goals more easily. Um, but it also helps us identify the things that we need to work on to become better as human beings, better as employees, better as parents, children, and so on. So self-awareness is an extremely important skill for people to develop, and especially for psychologists to develop, because we have direct impact on other people. In addition, we also want our students to learn and understand about their own and others' emotions, to learn not to place value judgments on emotions and to necessarily always see positive emotions as good and negative emotions as bad, because we need all kinds of emotions in order to have an enriching human experience. So in order for a person to develop holistically, you need to be able to learn how to process your emotions, understand your emotions, and also manage that emotion effectively in order to help you to get to where you want to go. So that's another element that we focus on. Um, we also want our students to develop empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand the experiences of other people and take into consideration their perspectives as well. I don't know how much you've been following the movements that are happening around the world with regard to racism and prejudice and so on. And a key component of being able to reduce things like prejudice and racism is the ability to empathize with other human beings, to understand the situations that they find themselves in and the problems that they are facing, so that we can find common ground in order to be able to work together to find a solution. So it's extremely important for a psychologist in particular to be able to have this skill, this ability to empathize with others, so that they can meet people where they're at and help to meet those needs as they go along. And finally, one extremely important element that we spoke about earlier is ethics. And we hammer this home with our students, because ethics is the ability to make a decision that is appropriate, that does the least amount of harm and the most amount of good for somebody in any given situation. And ethics is what prevents people from taking a neutral product or service or solution and making it work for the detriment of humankind, right? So when we talk about things like nuclear power, for example, it can be used to generate energy, electricity, and so on in a cleaner way. But nuclear power can also be used to be extremely destructive. So ethics would be the differentiator between how that power is actually used. Now, with psychologists, we have the ability to influence. And influence means I can either help you in a way that is going to benefit you, or I could manipulate you in a way that's going to benefit me. So an ethical psychologist will always err on the side of helping to benefit the other person, the person that they're working for. So that's why we need our students to be very aware of the ethical dilemmas that they are going to encounter, especially as technology evolves. So things like artificial intelligence, what can it or should it be used for? What should we be programming computers to do? All of these are very important ethical questions that our students will need to grapple with when they come out into the industry. and they need a strong grounding while they are with us in order to do this effectively. So this is one of the examples of the projects that we have in the Department of Psychology, where we get our students to look at real world current issues and talk about the ethical questions that arise out of these issues. So for example, you can see human cloning there, and our students are trained to analyze these issues and provide ethical considerations, ethical solutions to these different phenomena that are arising as a result of an advancement in technology, an advancement in human capabilities. So in conclusion to my portion, a good psychology graduate, therefore, is somebody who is able to marry very, very important skill sets in critical thinking, in the ability to do research, which is the ability to ask important questions in a scientific way and look for information in a systematic fashion in order to answer those questions, and also to be able to communicate. But marry that with a more human side, the consideration of how do we take care of our fellow human beings with the knowledge that we have of how human beings operate, what motivates us, and what allows us to grow and develop in the best way possible. So that is what our program is designed to do. I've talked a little bit more about the ethical side, the human side of things, but it is also important to recognize that the hard skill sets, the ability to ask important critical questions is equally as important in developing things like contextual intelligence in order to make our graduates effective. So I'll now pass on the time to Dr. Eugene T, who will talk to you a little bit about how we do that side of things with regard to our research culture and our culture of inquiry that we have in Help University's psychology program. All right, so passing on the time to Dr. Eugene.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Ying, for organizing this session. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you, and thank you for joining us here today for this really thought-provoking session. I hope the sessions that you've listened to so far have been able to pique your interest into the sort of culture and the orientation that our department takes. I'm very privileged to be able to share with you today the research and scientific thinking culture that we try to embed and infuse into our students. So just give me a moment. I'm just going to turn on my mic and already turn on my mic, turn on my webcam to say hello to you all. I'm going to switch that off as we switch over to my slides. I share the screen with you and we'll get today's presentation going. Full screen there. All right, folks, so feel free to type into the meeting chat window if any questions arise during this time. And it is my honor today to present to you the title of the presentation I'm about to give. It's called Science as a Candle in the Dark. And what we want to do really is to cultivate minds for scientific thinking in our Bachelor of Psychology program here at Help University. Here's an overview of what I'll be covering. Just very, very quickly, I'm going to stress the importance of why scientific thinking is now much more needed, much more important, and as a skill that is contributing towards complex problem solving, why that is so essential in a world in which we are flooded with information, we are flooded with data, but we know very little on how to make that into usable knowledge. I'm also going to share some examples of why ignorance is not a victimless crime. You may have heard of several instances of conspiracy theories, false beliefs, purported cures regarding the coronavirus, right? Just to use the virus example, a more recent example that most of you would still remember. What is it? Why is it damaging, rather, that when people believe such claims without substantial evidence, why can it be detrimental? This is where, as psychology graduates, this is where our psychology students come in. But first, we'll need to get them through a proper regime of training in order to think like a scientist, to be able to insist on evidence before they make certain conclusions, justifications, or worse, get into the point in which they offer remedies and treatments that don't necessarily have a backing in empirical evidence. And for that reason, what we'll also be doing, what I'll be covering in the session today, is to share some of the approaches that we take towards building what Elaine has mentioned, a culture of inquiry in our program. a culture in which questions are not only encouraged, they are invited, they are supported in the service of holistic learning. Over on to the next slide. We live in interesting times, don't we, ladies and gentlemen? And when I say interesting times, we live in a world in which information is so readily accessible through various sources, mediums, technological advancements. You hear cases of conspiracy theories, unsubstantiated claims that are evident during the recent pandemic. We are still dealing with fake news, unsubstantiated claims, purported cures that really are detrimental to our health, our physical and our mental health. So in the same way in which we are dealing with a health crisis, we are also dealing with an information crisis, and what many of you may have heard and recognized as an infodemic. Sad to say, ignorance is not a victimless crime. Believing such claims can be detrimental to our physical health and mental well-being. And even if there are claims of, say, downing a bit of water to cure you of the virus, that's not helpful, because then that's also going to create the impression that it's okay to head on out as long as we take a sip of water to fend against the virus. But we should also be very mindful that in our training for our future scientists, that we look upon and reflect upon ourselves first. Richard Feynman, well-regarded physicist, says that the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, because you are the easiest person to fool. And we don't want to be judgmental. We know that sometimes people act out of ignorance, but not necessarily out of malice. So Robert Hanlon's quote there is appropriate for our conversation today. I want to introduce scientific thinking, and many of you have come across the word science. A simple definition of it is simply that it is a systematic way of studying the world around us. And what we want to do in calculating these values and these tendencies to our students is to get them to think in a way that makes them less wrong. All right, we are focused on error reduction, and it's even more crucial today because so much information is out there, but not all of that information comes under close scrutiny. Science is, by definition, a body of statements, claims, lines of evidence, some of which we are unsure of, some of which we are nearly sure, none of which we are absolutely certain. But I'm also going to tell you why this is not a bad thing. Why, when we rely on scientific thinking, we are actually making or taking the steps towards reducing our own biases and tendencies. One excellent example that I like to bring up is to talk about pseudoscience, things, treatments, cures that purportedly claim to be scientific, but they are not. On the slide here, I have a list of different pseudoscientific theories. There have been ideas that you can gauge someone's personality through their handwriting. That's graphology. We also think at one point in time that we can assess people's personality in terms of their blood type. It's still big in Japan, for instance. We have neurolinguistic programming, which has been used in a lot of motivational talks. We have sugar pills that are claimed to be cures, all right? Homeopathic medicine. I hear a few chats actually coming through. Let me just bring that up again. We have facilitated communication, which is supposedly a way to help autistic people convey their thoughts and their emotions onto writing. And then towards the more dangerous end of pseudoscientific practices, ideas that you can change someone's sexual orientation, conversion therapy being one of them. And also the idea that vaccines cause autism. These are all dangerous non-scientific, pseudoscientific claims. On the next slide, what we do in the Bachelor of Psychology program is to help our students identify claims that supposedly say that they are scientific, but they are not. And it's a very easy way. So just as a practical takeaway for those of you here today, look out for cures that give the impression that they are based off scientific evidence. But when you ask for evidence in support of those claims, they have very little to come forward with. It also presents themselves as miracle cures and sometimes as the most reliable body of knowledge, not necessarily the case. What do we do in the Department of Psychology in our Bachelor of Psychology program to help prepare our students to combat false information, to fend off against pseudoscientific threats? We give them a rigorous research training. Research is the language of science. And some of you might think of the word theory as conjecture. We hold the word theory as a statement of facts which are very likely probable to be true. And this helps us separate in between what is science versus what is pseudoscience and also what is non-scientific. Here's an overview of what we do and our approach in our research methods courses. You might have heard, and maybe some of your friends, your family might say, yeah, it's very research intensive. When I signed up for psychology, I was thinking maybe we learn a bit about human personality, we learn about, our motivation, but through it all, embedded within our curriculum is a strong emphasis on developing strong, capable researchers. All right, so here's an overview. I'll walk you through each and every one of them just very quickly. We understand that research can be a very, very scary thing. When we present a new journal articles to our students, they are automatically taken aback by how technical it all seems. If you've ever read an academic piece before, you would know that scientific research is technical. It can also rouse some sense of anxiety. So what we do in our pedagogical approach is to approach students with a sense of closeness, empathy, hopefulness. We actually want them to say that it's okay to not know. This is a standard baseline position that when we try to understand the world, it is going to be challenging to try to identify patterns through the use of the scientific method. We share ourselves as lecturers our own experiences on how we go forth and try to understand the world around us. Hopefully, we move our students from being reluctant scientists to budding researchers. And I'm happy to say that some of our former students, we have continued on with a research collaboration with them. So they're our co-authors in this mutually beneficial journey of investigation, right? We publish papers together, we go on conferences together. A second approach that we take is to use problem-based approaches to teaching research. Ms. Elaine highlighted a list of real-world cases, real-world problems right now: prejudice, racism, stereotyping behaviors. These are all negative reflections of human nature. What we do is to bring real-world issues back into the classroom so that the students will know that we are using research to solve real-world problems. This also overlaps very nicely, coincides with our drive towards building contextual intelligence for our students. Other approaches that we take, we combine didactic and student-led approaches. Rather technical terms for us to just say that we adopt a more conversational approach in our classrooms. Should you be sitting in one of our research methods classes, you would find that the lecturer engages in conversation with the students on real-world issues. We encourage them to ask questions. We encourage them as well to share their experiences throughout their entire learning. And as of late, we have also taken to the use of collaborative technology, digital tools that help enhance group work. We have Microsoft Teams help us coordinate between group discussions, virtual group discussions. But beyond that as well, some of our more creative lecturers have taken to designing their curriculum so that there's elements of games in it. So gamification can also help as a scaffold to encourage our students to think scientifically, to make use of research methods, and they would actually be motivated and engaged with the material even more through the use of such technologies. What we essentially want to do in the Department of Psychology when students come through, and from the start and to the end, is to get them to understand that asking questions is important. It is important for a scientist. And even if you don't venture into a scientific career, it's important for individuals to know how to think scientifically. This involves them analyzing data, making sense of it, choosing what to believe and what not to believe on the basis of evidence, not on conjecture, not on just what someone else has said, even if the other person who's made a claim is purportedly an expert in that area. We do encourage and allow the students a considerable degree of autonomy in deciding their own research questions. So a wide range of different ideas. We have students examining and conducting research on LGBTQ issues related in this country. We have students who are very much into Japanese pop culture, so they study fandoms, they study cosplayers. We also have students study more, say, the main domains of research that Elaine has highlighted you. So neuroscientists, neuropsychological research. We recently had a student look into ASMR. All right, so that's the autonomic meridian sensory response. You might see in some of those weird videos with very comfortable, pleasing sounds online, and that seems to relax the individual. So we have a wide range of different ways in which we encourage a more inquisitive approach to learning. Of course, the lecturer also plays an important role in crafting this culture of inquiry. And what we do is to empower the lecturers to say, hey, you know what? If this is an approach that is beneficial for the students' learning, if this is a way in which you can encourage and motivate your students even further, we allow them to do that. At the very end of the Bachelor of Psychology program, what we get students to do is to come up with their own research study. And it's a piece of work which culminates in their, well, it's the final piece, their capstone project, if they will, before they graduate and before we send them out into this really challenging and uncertain world out there. But we don't have to worry that much about throwing our students into the deep end, because we do so, we give them the training incrementally. We start off with an introduction to quantitative methods. We also tell them what it means to think scientifically. We advance that knowledge in the second year with more advanced quantitative approaches. And then and only then do we give them the opportunity, or require them in this case, to do their undergraduate thesis. And through it all, like I said, we make use of a wide variety of different approaches, so as to make sure that they know at the end of it all what it means to think like a scientist. Just going to wrap up with a couple specific details I'm going to share with you, maybe give you a sort of insight into what it's like being in our classes. So for our introduction classes, we allow students to start thinking about their own research questions, openly discuss research ideas. We introduce them to key concepts. What is causality? Why is it not necessarily true that every time when I wash my car, it will rain? So that's an idea of causality over there. And whether ideas can be falsified, whether we can repeat the results, and we give them an introduction as well to inferential statistics. In a course dedicated specifically for scientific thinking, we ask students to read journal articles, but we guide them along on how to make sense of scientific writing. At the end of the course, many students find it a whole lot more comfortable to be able to write like scientists themselves. We also give them examples of what we call intentionally flawed manuscripts, problem manuscripts, all right? So scientific articles that, you know, seem a little bit suspicious, scrutinize it a little bit further, and we get the students to share why they think it's not a good scientific article. In our more advanced quantitative methods, we get students into the labs, they get hands-on laboratory practicals on statistical analysis, and they also start pitching ideas for research proposals, some of which have taken their research ideas and presented it at international conferences. In alignment with our culture of inquiry, we also encourage, we allow for students to work much more closely with the lecturers, one-on-one sessions in some cases, right? So you can think about our arts program, academic research training, as a way for students to be placed in a research internship, if you will. So every semester, approximately 100 places are available for students, and they can choose which kinds of projects that the lecturers are working in, and they will also stand to gain a lot of learning and benefit from being part of the lecturers' projects. We fund and we set aside money for funding students to attend international academic conferences as well. Travel plans might have been slightly disrupted this year, but over the past 5 years at least, we've had more than 400 students who've been funded to present their work. And I think it's a moment of pride, not just for students, but for us as well in the Department of Psychology, to know that our students' research work is presentable, acceptable at academic conferences at the regional, if not international level. And as part of our culture, to round things off for today, is that we have the undergraduate psychology student colloquium. All right, so it's an in-house research conference. I know it sounds stressful, and for many students who are presenting, it is stressful, but towards the end of it, they walk away with their heads held high, knowing that throughout the last 3, maybe 4 years of their education, they're able now to come up with their own unique independent research project. It is a culmination of their year-long research. It is a culmination for many of them at the end of their Bachelor of Psychology program. We have fun and games, we take photos, we hang out with some of our students even after, right? So I think it's really just a holistic and really fun part of being an undergraduate student in the Bachelor of Psychology program. Last but not least, I'll leave you with this really colorful slide, I think, with a whole range of research centers. And you might recall that I shared the different areas that students could work with their lecturers. We have Ms. Yvonne, who does work on meaning of life, That's the Existential Humanistic Psychology Center. We have Mr. James Yao, who is a music therapist. So music-related research, how does music aid us in cognition, critical thinking? That's his center. We have a newly set up Center for Mental Health and Wellbeing. That's by Associate Professor Mark Archer. And so issues relating to, say, problematic smartphone usage, depression and anxiety amongst youth. So those are kinds of topics that he's interested in. And among that as well, we have two labs, a virtual reality lab and an EEG lab. So virtual reality hooked up with computers, so we have driving simulators there. We have an EEG lab which tracks electrical impulses and signals on the scalp as indicative of brain-related activity. We have and the psychology of play, so scientific studies on how board games and video games can assist with learning, all in a trend towards gamification of education further. So hopefully I've been sufficiently clear and succinct in my description, and I'd like to pass the time right now back to Jerry, who will take us through the remainder of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eugene. Certainly a very insightful treatment of what we do in terms of research at the Department of Psychology, and why is it that it's so important in the field of psychology itself. And I hope for those of you who are listening, it gives you a very good understanding of the depth and breadth of what we do at the Department of Psychology, how we do it, and most importantly, why we do it. Yeah. And as I said right from the start, the whole point of how we structure our program is to be able to develop human beings to be the best version of themselves as possible, in order for them then to be able to help empower other people, right? To be the best versions, and then to create a society where human beings are able to live meaningful lives. Now, I've got two interesting questions that have been asked by members of the audience. One is by Parameswaran, and she asks this question. I have a question. If AI are taking over jobs, and if they are capable of taking each and every profession that was previously done by human beings, then could it be viable for us to develop and live in a society, preferably a cashless society, where human beings are not employed in any form, and where everything is basically free? Now, I'm just going to make some attempt at this. Eugene and Elaine, please feel free to jump in. Right. So let me do some qualifications here regarding the world of work, right? And the first thing to say is, work shouldn't be seen as a chore. Work is very much an extension. Work doesn't necessarily have to be something that is a burden, right? I know a lot of people say, when we ask them, so how's life? Oh, just surviving. And why are you surviving? Yeah, I have to work just to pay the bills. And you ask a lot of people, it is that. But you ask also a lot of other people, why do they work? Because, they work because it gives them joy, it gives them meaning, it adds to the quality of their lives. It's as Eugene was sharing with you. All the research that we do, a lot of that research is really to look at ways in which how we can actually benefit human beings in order to have a better quality of life. That's why psychology is lumped together under what we call the helping professions, right? And so think of work in that way. That is really an extension of who we are as human beings, that we are able to produce, to create, to solve problems, to live in society, to live with one another in a way that makes our lives meaningful, that enriches our lives. All of those are different aspects of what it means to be fully human, right? And if you get money doing something that really you enjoy doing, that's a wonderful byproduct, right, of the kind of world that we live in. So yes, in some ways robots can take over, but the human beings cannot ever be replaced by robots 100%. Yeah, and just give you a classic example. This morning I was just reading an article that was sent by the Vice Chancellor about how Singapore is responding to the economic fallout of the pandemic. Yeah, and they are in conversations, and this particular minister was saying there are countries that basically want to close up, that is all very inward-looking and self-serving, but places like Singapore, they are reaching out to like-minded countries, yeah, where they realize more than anything else, for a country to survive today in such an interconnected world, they have to start collaborating. They have to start problem solving, looking at an economy, a world economy, where all of us benefit, not just one country benefit more than another country. But the process of having those conversations, the process of problem solving, the process of collaboration, the process of thinking through difficult problems, all of those are human process that cannot be done by machines or AI. Those are things that involve listening to you, understanding where you're coming from. Elaine used the word empathy. All of those are important aspects of the human interaction that works towards trying to problem solve with other human beings to bring about a better world. So in that way, there will never be a society that I can imagine, as long as you have human beings, that robots will take over everything, and all we ever do is just sit in front on our beach chairs next to the swimming pool or in front of the beach and just sipping our tequila or whatever a drink that we might have in our hands. I don't think that kind of life will be the kind of life that most people would aspire for. Only, yeah, there must be a little bit more than just that. Yeah, Eugene, Elaine, you want to add on to that?
Elaine?
Eugene, go ahead if you'd like to add.
I think it's an interesting thought experiment, isn't it? So as Parameshwaran's comments say, when you say cashless society, thought-provoking, I know there are some countries that are experimenting with a universal income right now. I'm not sure whether we would stretch all the way to a completely cashless society, on whether we will be completely made redundant through the use of technology, or in this case, very intelligent technical forms. Right, so I think there are certain things, as Jerry has mentioned, that computers will not be able to adequately replicate our ability to empathize, our ability to storytell. If you imagine a world in the future, I think we would still require mothers to read stories to their children. I think we would still want a human influence, a human therapist rather than a robotic one. We want a compassionate, caring, empathetic nurse, doctor, caregiver, caretaker. We want teachers who are passionate. So the things that make us seemingly irrational or out of control, like our emotions, right, are also things that make us human. And I think we are better off with them if we're able to manage them than if we don't have them at all.
Excellent. Another question from Paramis is Dr. T for you, Eugene. Can you give any comments as to why people allow themselves to listen and entertain certain conspiracy theories and pseudoscience, and also why conspiracy theories and pseudoscience stink in a certain way? Any thoughts?
Yeah, fascinating question, and thank you for that as well. In fact, when I saw the message, I was scratching my head. There is an entire body of literature on pseudoscientific thinking and conspiracy theories, the psychology of the conspiracy theorists. Now, I've not read into that area. It's not directly within my area of expertise, but I'm gonna say that there is some tendency for individuals to want to seek out ideas, thoughts, news that conform with their most deeply held worldviews. So individuals who have a sort of animosity towards scientific evidence, who say maybe go against or protest against the teaching of, let's say, evolutionary theory in schools, they're not going to be the ones that take very kindly to science telling them that they should be vaccinated. So I think it goes right down into a kind of threat to their values. And especially in the US, there is this movement towards anti-science, right? There's even in the academic arena, a move towards postmodernism, in that everyone's subjective experiences and interpretations are equally as valid as empirical, in a sense, hard evidence. So long story short, I think what I can say, at least from my sort of rather limited knowledge, is that people believe what they want to believe. And I think this fuels a lot of the belief and support for conspiracy theories. You've heard of people in the UK taking down 5G towers because they think it spreads the coronavirus, right? So that's one example of that. Conformity to deeply held values and beliefs might be one of the reasons driving the belief in conspiracies and pseudoscience. I think Elaine has something to contribute to this. I think we mentioned this before.
Yes, I think what Eugene has brought up is very much the underlying mechanism, really, because sometimes you hear people say, oh, it's a lack of education and so on. But in reality, a lot of very educated people hold very unscientific beliefs and are not willing to be convinced by scientific evidence. So it is not necessarily exposure to education that is the cause for people wanting to buy into a conspiracy theory or to buy into pseudoscience. So there is a very self-protective mechanism, as Eugene says, about the values and beliefs that we hold. It's the actual term for it is something called confirmation bias, whereby we selectively pay attention to the information that suits our worldview when we're looking at the evidence that is presented to us. So this is something that even people who have educations are very susceptible to, and it's something that we strive to educate our students on, that we all have this tendency, and that we need to actively put things in place to counteract this tendency so that we can be more open to the information that is available out there and make more critical judgments of that information in spite of what we believe to be true. So that's a really good question, and I think Eugene basically gave you the gist of it. I just wanted to.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah. Certainly, confirmation bias, cognitive dissonance, all of those are concepts, that are very fascinating to explore. And that gives you a really good insight, isn't it, in terms of what happens in the world of human beings. But those things are wonderful things. That's what really makes us human, to be able to discuss, to investigate, to find out why we do the things that we do, what motivates us. All of those are fascinating questions that psychologists really explore. And as long as there are human beings, there will be psychologists involved in this. Final question from Waylin. I think Eugene made a mention of NLP being pseudoscience, and the question is, can you give examples of how NLP is considered a pseudoscience?
Right. So there are practitioners of NLP, and what we actually hold the standards of treatments and interventions to, especially when they make very broad claims about their supposed benefits and cures, is repeated evidence. So what, unfortunately, NLP has been shown is that it does not return reliable, consistent indications and proof of its effectiveness through repeated trials. And just muddying the concept even further is that you often see, hey, look, NLP cites and makes use of scientific evidence, right? But they pick and choose what conforms and what aligns with their central claims are. I think the biggest red flag to NLP is the claim that it can help as a treatment for a whole range of mental disorders, mental health issues, depression, anxiety. I'm not sure whether they make so far as a claim to be able to cure cancer or anything. A lot of cures supposedly want to cure cancer. But Waylin, I think what we are trying to look for is consistent evidence that it works. And unfortunately, with NLP, the evidence does not support that idea of consistency.
Just to jump in very quickly as well, one other way that we can sort of tell if something is potentially pseudoscientific rather than actually scientific is the evidence that is being cited. So one of the issues with NLP, for example, is that a lot of the evidence of its effectiveness is what we call anecdotal evidence. So meaning that it worked with my client, or it worked for me. That is not the standard of evidence that is required in science. In science, we need to put these claims to rigorous trials, repeated testing, in order for us to make such quote-unquote truth claims, which is where the evidence for NLP as being effective is currently lacking. That's not to say that if it's put through more testing that we might see different results in the future. We don't know that. So the whole point of science is to be open, but at where it currently stands in terms of the quality of the evidence that's available, it's still classed as a pseudoscience because of the lack of quality evidence for its effectiveness.
Okay, I'm just looking at the time, and I think we've also run out of questions. Thank you very much again to my fellow panelists, Ms. Elaine Fernandez, the head of the Department of Psychology, and Associate Professor Dr. Eugene T. From the Department of Psychology at HELP, Thank you, all of you who have taken an hour of your time to be with us today. This afternoon, we have another fascinating session, and this time you will get to hear at 2 o'clock experiences from our graduates itself. So don't take our word for it. Take the word of the experiences of people who have gone through our program and what they are doing now, how the program actually helped them in their careers. Three very interesting members of our alumni. And I hope you get a chance to listen to them at 2 o'clock. Yeah, so thank you again. Yinin, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jerry, Elaine, and Dr. Eugene. A very insight information about psychology indeed. Now to our attendees, thank you so much for joining our session today.